Good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. I am Dena Boynes-Bardouille, and the other members of this group are Lynn Beckles, Kenya Campo, and Demindra Dubé. Should you have any comments or questions during our presentation, feel free to enter it on the chat and we will respond in due course. Tonight, our group will be presenting on integrating information and communication technologies, ICT, in technical vocational education. The increasing application of ICT in industry and business has created a dynamic workplace environment that TVET institutions must try to simulate in the delivery of the curriculum. ICT has pervaded every workplace to the extent that ICT skills upgrading has become a major training business in its own right. Secondary schools need to cover the skills requirement as they do for the other subjects taught in schools, which they integrate both the technical and professional skills required by industry. For this to be applied in TVET subjects, schools must re-equip the students with the skills required to keep up with this new reality. The title of our project, Sowing Seeds of a Knowledge-Based Economy, builds on the fact that the extraordinary growth in the young people exiting secondary education creates a demand which cannot be met by brick and mortar alone. The seeds we are sowing is a new model which is needed to integrate ICT. The topics we will be discussing are integration of information communication technology, ICT, in technical vocational education, TVET. Historical background and the role with respect to education, society needs, and technology. The proposed future implementations and the stages involved in implementation. Personnel needed for this to be successful. And finally, anticipated barriers and suggested solutions and possible results. In today's world, how a student learns is dependent on how the student reacts to the learning resources offered. Information and communication technology is playing a major role in people's daily lives. So it is not surprising that online learning is accepted as an important tool in the general education sector. However, its adoption in technical and vocational education and training is yet to reach the equivalence of the general education sector. With the availability of a vast array of online learning technology tools, there is greater opportunity for acquiring the technology that can support TVET practices. The aim of this presentation is to discuss the trends of ICT integration in teaching and learning in TVET. Technical and vocational education and training has evolved from providing well-trained basic operators to providing professional knowledge workers as suggested by Wang 2010, and I quote, "The primary goal of skills training is to provide youth with practical techniques and skills based on professional knowledge rather than manufacture well-trained basic operators," end of quote. ICT integration requires high investment, installations, maintenance, and technical support, and teacher training in specific pedagogy, the World Bank 2013. Before we can plan for an effective integration of ICT on a large scale in TVET, we need to have a good idea of how effective ICT integration in TVET has been to date and what can be done to improve the current situation. Lynn will now discuss the historical background of TVET in the Caribbean.
Thanks, Dana. Caribbean educational systems were heavily influenced by our colonial past. Turner 2001 describes the post-independence expectations of the teacher, albeit in the Jamaican context, and I quote, "Teachers are the vital personnel in the attainment of educational objectives. They develop skills, transmit knowledge, and through their personality, their classroom climate, and the type of learning activity that they provide, they determine the direction and intensity of the socialization process." Today, TVET is being embraced in higher learning. Jules 2012 advocated for the need to include TVET in the secondary school curriculum so that we could create a more job-ready graduate. Dixon and Hutton 2016 would have made the case for the inclusion of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics using the TVET approach. So significant strides are being made in the Caribbean. This visual captures our futuristic view of education in the Caribbean. We believe that TVET can prepare our region's graduates to participate in a knowledge-based economy, one that is global, competitive, and knowledge-intensive. Specifically, using ICTs as both a teaching method and a medium for delivering curriculum. A curriculum that forces us to rethink how teachers and students currently interact. We're hoping to achieve a teaching and learning experience that evolves in response to market forces. What does that roadmap look like? Dan, can you share?
And here is our concise roadmap. Dixon and Hutton 2016 suggests that Caribbean countries must look beyond the focus on traditional subjects in order to be competitive in the global market. They also point to a role for TVET in equipping students with 21st century skills. Sobran 2013, in his paper Making TVET Relevant to a Postmodern Caribbean, rejects the notion of TVET as the domain of non-academics and points to a need for ICT skills in a new look TVET. A curriculum that focuses more on critical thinking and problem solving is also recommended. And now we look at the actual policy design. But policy design in education is not something to be taken lightly. So we sought guidance from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and examined its relevance to our context. The OECD points out in this infographic that educational policy must be purposeful and multi-directional. We also examined this infographic from the same presentation to get a sense of purpose, and here we noted that the policy must be justified and feasible, and there must be stakeholder engagement. The policy must be relevant, of course, to the Caribbean context, and most importantly, we need resources and good communication. We gave due consideration to this framework shown in the previous slide and sought to identify the key stakeholders of relevance to our proposed policy. This is a modified infographic from the OECD to include the proposed interaction between stakeholders and policymakers. So following Hutton and Dixon 2016, we do not propose radical change, for there's already a light at the end of the tunnel, and we can see it. Shown here is the magnificent G-Pan and now the Phi-Pan, both invented at our own UWI. Also we see the Tamana Intech Park, designed to be an incubator for the knowledge-based economy, and it's connected to the UTT, the University of Trinidad and Tobago. But this is all about Trinidad, you might ask. What about the rest of the Caribbean? Well, our own Lynn Beckles will tell you from her personal experience.
At the 4th International Conference on TVET in the Caribbean held in Jamaica in May 2019, two very interesting strands were featured. One, the use of ICTs, and two, TVET youth empowerment and entrepreneurship. And finally, the Skills for the Future Summit, an initiative hosted by the Barbados' Ministry of Education, Technical and Vocational Training, and the Inter-American Development Bank. At that conference, they would have drilled down into the knowledge economy, looking specifically at the creative economy, the green economy, the blue economy, and looking at how competence-based education could contribute to the economic development of Barbados.
And CXC, the Caribbean Examinations Council, has introduced new age subjects including animation and game design, and artificial intelligence and robotics is under development. But both of these will be introduced at the CAPE level, the Advanced Proficiency Exam level. But how will we ensure that our graduates don't depart for Dubai, Singapore, and Thailand? And what is the current state of TVET? The CXC does have a CVQ, a Caribbean vocational qualification, and we certainly don't want to sit in our ivory tower of academia and be blind to the changes around us, the changes that are in line with moving towards the knowledge-based economy. But let me remind you that our focus is on a new TVET, a restructured TVET, and one that will allow a budding chef, a seamstress, or a plumber a foot in the door that leads to the vision of a new Caribbean with a vibrant, knowledge-based economy. So despite all of the changes, we must be aware of the need to restructure TVET. But in this restructuring, there are going to be inevitable hurdles. And to tell you all about that, I pass you over to Kenya.
Thanks, Dan. These 4 steps, which I shall discuss, are centered around strengthening the quality of technical vocational education and training systems, which are essential for successful school-to-work transitions and upward career paths. Now, how do we achieve this? First step is making a plan, as plans for ICT usage need to take account of training for new sectors, training for new jobs, and the impact of technology on existing jobs. Secondly, we need to build smart classrooms and outfit new laboratories and update old facilities in our secondary schools. We must create courses and materials for digital delivery. And finally, we need to teach. Teach for the new learning environment. The task is to find and deploy competent, confident teachers to deliver learning in a digital environment. These are the key areas in promoting the goal of integrating ICTs in TVET. The model proposed by Haddad and Draxler in 2002 becomes relevant. In order to meet the current access demands for education and training, we cannot rely on linear scaling model, which is faced in Caribbean school systems to date, where growth is dependent on a school constrained by space, time, and limited resources. In our research, we discovered new models that utilize the benefits of ICT, of which my colleague Dan previously mentioned. In the Caribbean, schools have already begun integrating ICT in their teaching systems through the utilization of smart whiteboards. Although these technologies and configurations may support some teachers and their classes, they will be used in most instances to support traditional curricula and pedagogy. I have to ask, do you think this example of ICT integration is being utilized in its fullest capacity? The introduction of computers and the internet in schools can be seen as a valuable integration for its own sake, but the integration of ICT into a reformed curriculum may need to lead to a deeper change in teaching and learning. According to UNESCO in 2000, during the last decade, there has been increased focus on the use of ICTs for the management and delivery of TVET in both developed and developing nations. Countries are in different stages of development, from the industrial to the information age, and are establishing strategies to reform TVET to meet the changing demands of the knowledge economy. Based on the chart, the challenges facing technical and vocational education and training in the 21st century demand learner-centered, innovative, and flexible approaches. Furthermore, the increase of ICT in the workplace, the demand to increase access to vocational education and training, the lack of qualified teachers, and the requirement to provide opportunities for continuing professional development add to these challenges. In integrating ICT in TVET, we realize that one must recognize the gaps caused by socioeconomic status, gender, age, and geographic location. With that being said, we must link institutional organizations to prepare certifications and assessments, thereby fostering institutional links between public and private training providers and generating the synergies amongst them. In order to do these, we must identify new sources of funding from the national governments and even collaboration with the private sector if we are to move towards an inclusive development of integrating ICTs in the TVET curriculum. In many developing countries, it is difficult to justify ICT as a driver for change in TVET based upon aspirational notions of a formal knowledge economy. However, if the perspective is changed to the development of a knowledge or information society where ICT can be seen to improve social services, access to education, the development of civil organizations and services, then we can make more sense of the question, why ICT in TVET for developing countries?